Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of the Homer and Hater Show. And this might be the last, Mike, the last episode of the Homer and Hater Show. But before we get to that, I want to say welcome, Mike. How you doing?
Oh, I'm doing great. Nice sunny summer day out here on the West Coast for me, at least. So I'm enjoying the weather, enjoying kicking back, talking some Steelers football with you. How you doing, Lance?
I'm doing okay. I see you have the nice new Blue Yeti microphone. So I see you, Mike, up in your equipment.
I have had this one for a little bit now, just been hiding it off screen.
You've been hiding it off screen. I love it. I love it. The silver one is nice. I have the black. Unfortunately, we're black and silver. We should have got a gold one. So I could have had my mic on screen and it would have been black and gold. But I don't know. We won't say who's the team that's black and silver. We won't say who that is. But before we hop into the program, I want to give a big shout out to everybody at BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Big up to Dave Schofield, the Oracle, the editor-in-chief of BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Big up to his brother, Big Bro Sco. Big up to the podcast coordinator extraordinaire, Brian Anthony Davis, a.k.a. Who's Bad, a.k.a. Mr. 2AM, a.k.a. Bad is just a wealth of knowledge, of all pop knowledge, all things pop. If you want to know a song that was number one on your birthday or something in 1982, Bad knows it. Also, big up to Tony Defio and Jeffrey Benedict. So the topic of this particular show is why Mason Rudolph is more important than you think. But before we jump into that, we want to throw a question to you, listeners. We're going to change the name of this program because I don't want to be labeled the hater anymore. I want to get away from that. That's why I'm wearing green, because green is lucky. It represents spring. I just want to turn over a new leaf and be the calmer, more gentle, the more positive Lance Williams. So I want to get away from the hate moniker. And so you had a title for this show. You had a suggestion, Mike. Why don't you give the people your suggestion of what the show should be called?
Now, before taking over my deputy editor role, I was still running my own podcast, but it wasn't live on YouTube, and we ran it as The Live Mike. If that's something you guys are interested in as a title, I suppose it is just a title, but if it's something you like, we can continue to roll with that.
Here's my suggestion for the show, because I wanted to try to incorporate Mike's name into the show, but using some entendre and not talking about the first name Mike, but the microphone. And I was thinking of Steelers mic check. So like when you're rapping or you're singing, you go, mic check, mic check. So we got the Steelers mic check, excuse me. And give me your suggestion again,
The live mic is the old one that we've read before. So I'm down for either.
Okay, so hey, give us some suggestions in the live chat. Mark Tobin said the lover and the hater show. No, Mark, we're trying to get away from hate because love is love. We could go the love and the love show, but that would be too much love. That would be overwhelming in terms of love. So if you guys have some suggestions, throw them in there. Awesome Stuff said the Black and Gold show. I kind of like that one. And I kind of like that one. Definitely not black and yellow. Do not do that. Don't make that mistake and say black and yellow like Wiz Khalifa, although he was talking about his car, not the Steelers, and the Steelers incorporated the song because Wiz is from East Liberty, went to Taylor Alderdice. He is a resident of the city, so he knows better. Oh, how about this one, Mike? Truth or Consequences from Kathy Fareed.
It's pretty good. I like that. That could work.
Steelers, Truth or Consequences. Oh, how about this one? Home and Away. I don't know. That one kind of rolled off a little bit. I know you got better stuff than that Awesome Stuff 1983. So put your heads together and let's think about it. But let's jump into the topic. And the topic is why Mason Rudolph is more important than you think. And I want to set this up by first asking you this simple question, Mike. I want to get your perspective on this. What was the biggest issue that prevented the Steelers from making the playoffs last year?
Well, obviously, I think looking back at a year ago, it was that quarterback play. There was just mistakes constantly and consistently all season long, trying to work the ball down the field or really anything. It just wasn't. It wasn't. It wasn't the level it should have been, and I don't think the quarterbacks were prepared heading into the season. I think the guys they have perhaps would have been a little more successful if they did get those reps, but Ben's the guy that gets all the reps. He gets all the game planning days. Mason Rudolph didn't even have a quarterback coach heading into 2019. So to say that the cards were stacked against him, I think would be pretty fair.
Do you think the acquisition of Matt Canada might have been an admission of the fact that the backup quarterbacks were underprepared? Or do you think they were under? Or do you think they were underprepared?
Oh yeah, I definitely think their backups were underprepared. It was almost just like we have Ben, we don't have to worry about it, and I think that's a big mistake because if you're drafting Mason Rudolph, I believe it was the 3rd round. Why wouldn't you want to develop him for the future, or at the very least to trade him away if he did have a good game or two in there, like a Jimmy Garoppolo and what the Patriots did with him? So I think that was a mistake. I think the flip side of that with bringing Matt Canada in as well is his creativity, his like modern era offensive approach. I know he's not the offensive coordinator, but he's famous for his play action and his play motion. So I think his acquisition to the team is both to work with those quarterbacks very closely and then help Randy Fichtner develop more of a 2020 style of offense.
So correct me if I'm wrong. His official title, Matt Canada, is quarterback coach, or is he like offensive consultant? Sort of like, Terrell Austin has this kind of weird amorphous title.
No, I believe if you go to his page on his on the Steelers page, rather, it is listed as quarterback coach only.
Okay, so that's a tacit admission by the team that the quarterback backup situation was not up to snuff. Were you surprised that they didn't bring anybody essentially in other than Paxton Lynch to be a competitor to improve that backup position? Because I'm on record as being adamant about they should have signed Jameis Winston, they should have signed Cam Newton, that they should have bolstered that room with a more veteran presence in that quarterback room. Now I've heard Dave talk about that wouldn't happen because of, Ben might not want another veteran in the quarterback room. I don't know how true that is. I mean, that's probably speculation on everybody's part. But were you disappointed that they didn't bolster that quarterback room?
You know what? I would say I was when it happened to Ben when he first got injured. I would have said go out and get a quarterback then. I know that's not the biggest air of confidence to Mason Rudolph, but I think him not getting those reps, I think it would totally been fair. Why not pick up both Fitzpatricks from Miami? I think if Ryan Fitzpatrick's the Steelers quarterback, I think they make the playoffs last year at least. But this season, I think with Ben claiming how healthy he is, I think it's fair that they didn't go out and get one, specifically because of what Dave has said in the past with not wanting to have a veteran quarterback with Ben on the roster, rather having the young guys. When Ben was young, the backups were old, like the Byron Leftwiches, the Bruce Goodkowskis, Charlie Batches of the world. Those were the backup quarterbacks back then. In the last 5 years, you see the backups are like Landry Jones, who I believe was a 4th round pick, and Mason Rudolph, another high draft pick. And the philosophy has been, as Ben's gotten older, the backups are younger for someone who could develop into a role possibly, and someone that Ben could mentor. But I think that's just the way the organization runs. And if that's their philosophy, I think you shouldn't stray away from that.
Let me ask you one last question before we get to the question of the program. Is quarterback depth, in your opinion, still the Steelers' biggest issue?
In 2020, I would say yes if Ben isn't healthy. Like, the only thing is we haven't seen him throw a pass. We haven't seen anything. So it's really hard to answer that in the quarterback sense because we don't know what we have from Ben. If he really is as healthy as he's claiming to be, not feeling pain for the first time in years, then I would say no, it's not the biggest issue because there is some depth pieces on the defensive side that I'd say is a bigger concern. So I would say no in that sense. But I think the quarterback position moving forward will start to be a bigger and bigger issue.
Before I comment on your thoughts, I love this one, Moosehead and Cognac. I would edit that and say Moosehead and bourbon, but I don't know if we could do alcoholic beverages in the title of the shows. You could go beer and bourbon, the beer and bourbon show, because you have to give generic names. We can't do any trademark issues. I don't even know if you could do alcohol in the name of the title on YouTube, because YouTube has all these funny rules. But that one was pretty funny. Moosehead and Cognac. I like that. It would be beer, but I would change it to beer and bourbon. I kind of like that. The beer and bourbon show. That's I like that. That was the best one that I've heard so far. To what you said, Mike, if you don't know, then it's a no, right? So, like, unless it's a yes, it's not a yes. So if there's uncertainty around the quarterback position, then it's a no. Like then your yes is still the yes. It's the yes that the quarterback position still probably is the biggest issue on the team, because it's a big unknown. You've got like 5 or 6 question marks. And I think that leads us to the question for the top of the program of why Mason Rudolph is more important than you think. Because on the defensive side of the football, I think they're right. I think they're ready to go. On that side of the ball, what do they have? Like 8 or 9 first-rounders starter. They got a ton of talent. They're ready to roll. They got quality depth. There's some depth issues in some certain areas, but they're ready to go. We've seen that they're good enough to carry this football team, even with a bad, inconsistent offense that was led by Mason Rudolph and Doug Hodges. So I want to toss the question to you. The reason why I think Mason Rudolph is so important on this team is if Ben gets hurt, or if Ben's performance at some point drops for some reason, if Mason Rudolph is the number 2 and he has to play better football to sustain this football team. Now, I'm on record as saying that I think Ben is going to play, particularly because next year his cap hit is the biggest in the National Football League. That screams an extension, that they're going to have to do something with that deal. But there's no guarantee that at 38, he can play till he's 39, 40, 41, where he can play out the next several years. And with this team having this championship defense ready to go, we don't know what's going to happen to Bud Dupree. We're going to assume that Cam Hayward's going to be back. We're going to assume that TJ Watt's going to be back. And this defense and Minka's going to be back, that it's going to stay where it is and it's still going to play at a high level. Mason Rudolph, to me, is the second most important player on this team behind Ben Roethlisberger. He has to take the step to sustain this football team in the event that Ben Roethlisberger does not recover from injury or is not as good from injury. And if he doesn't play into the future, as I've suggested, that you have a backup that's ready to assume the reins and continue this dominant defense that they have, because the defense is ready to go. That's why I think that Mason Rudolph is more important than you think. They cannot afford to lose the 2020 season based on bad backup quarterback play. So Mason Rudolph has to take the biggest jump of any young player on this football team. He has to get to the place where Ben Roethlisberger is feeling like, man, I need to step up my play. Mason's playing really good in practice. He's pushing me to get better. Like, he has to be, and I'm going to ask you this question again. I'm going to ask you another question about how good I think Mason Rudolph needs to be. But am I off base? I think Mason Rudolph is the second most important guy on this football team.
I would suggest you're a little off, just because of the guys protecting Big Ben. I think are second through sixth most important, just because those guys, if Ben's getting bumped, his chance of getting injured just shoots up way more, and then you get into that Mason Rudolph potentially stepping in. But I would say he is extremely important because of what's available at quarterback still. When it comes to free agency or trade, because there really isn't a whole lot. If Ben goes down, it's Mason Rudolph's team, period. And if it's a repeat performance of last year, the Steelers still have a chance of making the playoffs because the rest of their team's so good. But they were held back. I will give Mason Rudolph some credit. The best game he played was against the Jets before he broke his collarbone. He was completing passes. He looked good. He was stepping up in the pocket. He didn't look like he had a wet noodle for an arm for once. And I think if he could do that and continue to play that kind of style of more check down, game general type quarterback play, whenever it's his turn to be the starting quarterback, he'll be fine. But for right now, I think there's just too much other stuff going on in this team to say he's the second most important, just because being able to keep Ben healthy and being able to protect him and take some pressure off of him is more important as the starting offense is concerned.
So where would you rank him then? If you're not going to say second, and second, I agree with you, might be a bit much. I can, get into some hyperbole a bit. I apologize for that, listeners. But what I want to emphasize is that he's just extremely important. Like, where would you rank him in terms of his importance on this football team?
I think when I really get down to it, I would have to put every starter and then Chris Boswell ahead of him. Because if Boz is kicking like he did in 2018, this team, obviously you saw it, they should have made the playoffs, couldn't make a field goal or extra point to save their lives. But I'd still rank him ahead of Jordan Berry. So I guess that puts him at 24. But then if there's an injury, he shoots all the way up to number 1. But as of right now, when it comes to backups and depth, and he would be the top of that list. But until something happens where he has to be the guy, I think Mason Rudolph is just below the starters and the kicker in terms of importance to this team.
I'm going to rank him just a little bit higher. I'm going to rank him a little bit higher because of Ben's injury and his uncertainty. He kind of slots as like this starter in waiting. Until we see Ben play, and I don't think there's going to be a preseason. The NFL hasn't said anything about it, but we all know that the first 2 games, no, it's not the first 2 games. It's the first and third game, I think, won't be being played. But we know there's.
I know the games that aren't being played are the Tampa game and the Carolina game. For the Carolina, I think the first time in like 21 years they haven't.
So it might be the second and the fourth.
Something like that. I can't remember.
The Steelers typically play Carolina in the fourth game, like every single year. They play Carolina.
I think it's 1 and 4, maybe. I believe Tampa was supposed to be the first game.
Yeah, I think it's 1 and 4.
I guess technically the second game if you count the Hall of Fame, because that was supposed to be Tom Brady's first game in Tampa Bay jersey, even though he wouldn't play in that game.
Yeah, so I just think that you'll definitely for in terms of depth, like he's absolutely, to your point, number 1 on the depth chart in terms of importance of backup players. Because I just can't the Steelers just can't afford to lose in an entire season with Ben being 38-39. I mean, you just have to. And so Dave said the first and fourth are not happening. It's the second and third that's being played. Let me ask you a question about Mason Rudolph and how well you think he can play or where he can ascend to and how good he can be. You think Mason Rudolph can make the jump? And I think this is his 3rd season. Can he be as good as Charlie Batch this year? Can he give you the warm and fuzzy feeling that Charlie Batch gave you? Because I had a warm and fuzzy feeling with Charlie Batch. After Charlie Batch won that game in Baltimore, and the way Charlie Batch started hot when Ben was suspended, and they went 3-1, and Charlie Batch played great football in Atlanta. I love Charlie Batch, Steel Valley High School. Charlie was my guy. My password on my computer for years was CBatch 2012 because that was my password. It was CBatch 2012 %, because I remember the hug that Charlie Batch and Ben Roethlisberger gave each other on the sidelines in Baltimore when Charlie Batch went out there and beat the Ravens on the road. I was like, Charlie's my guy forever. You think you'll ever feel as good about Mason Rudolph as I did about Charlie Batch? You think Mason Rudolph can ascend and be as good as that Charlie Batch guy where Steeler fans is like, we're good, Charlie can carry us? What's your thoughts?
You know what? I think perception on Mason Rudolph will change this year if everything goes how I kind of plan it in my mind, in a perfect world, really. If the Steelers are in a spot where, when you look at their schedule, they should be in a spot where they already have their playoff spot locked down by week 17. And I would assume that would be that Landry Jones, Mason Rudolph type game. I believe it is Cleveland again to end the year. I think that game is when Mason Rudolph could really kind of show his stuff. Kind of like, I don't know if you remember when Matt Flynn played that one game in Green Bay and threw for 5 touchdowns and nearly 500 yards and ended up getting a giant contract in Seattle and then pretty much got cut right away. But I could totally see him have a game like that where he just plays once this year and then everyone's like, okay, hold up a second here. A full year with Matt Canada. He kind of understands his role in this team. He could kind of develop. And then in 2021, everyone's like, you know what? I think we are going to back up with Mason Rudolph here. And then who kind of knows where it moves on from there? But he definitely could kind of move up if he continues to play the way that he did against the Jets. He could be like a Ryan Tannehill, just like game manager type. I'm not saying he could be that explosive, completely change his career around like Tannehill did in Tennessee. But he could be a player like that, like just kind of comes out of nowhere. Perception on him is really low, and then all of a sudden he starts stringing some really good games together. I could see that happening. It wouldn't surprise me. As of right now, that warm and fuzzy Charlie Badge backup quarterback feeling isn't there, but I totally think it could be, and that really stems from Mason Rudolph not having to play a full 16 games this year.
So let me ask you this. So if he makes the jump, what does it look like? Like, what does it look like, and what difference is it for you than it was last season? Is it, more accuracy, more movement in the pocket, getting through reads quicker, being better on third down, better in the red zone? Like, where do you think we see his improvement in 2020 if he has to play?
You know what? Mason Rudolph, when he played last year, he really statistically wasn't that bad. He was Mr. Checkdown, though. He was only throwing those super high completion passes, those really open receivers. He wasn't trusting his arm. He wasn't working the ball downfield to his real playmakers, and he really struggled on the deep ball. And in turn, and then obviously the game against Cleveland, which really blew up his interception numbers. If you take that out, he really didn't have that terrible of a statistical season. However, you can't really win games on 3-yard passes. You just got to look at Joe Flacco for that and kind of what happened in his career after some of those big name offensive players kind of left Baltimore. And then he moved on to Denver. So I think in that sense, Mason Rudolph's kind of got to develop that intermediate to advanced passing game, working the ball down the field. If he's not able to do that, then I think this offense again struggles. Teams will continue to stack the box, just completely crush the ability to run the ball, and just force Mason Rudolph to throw quick checkdowns, which isn't a way to play football. Offensively in 2020, you can't be doing that. You got to be working the ball down the field. And I think if he can work on his deep ball accuracy, hitting those first and second reads on those intermediate to longer routes, I think he'll be more successful.
I think that's a good way to look at it. I think one of the things is pocket presence. I thought his pocket presence was severely lacking. He would get, and I thought he was just slow to process. And that's to be expected from a player as inexperienced as him. But hopefully we will not see him play many games, and hopefully this will not be an issue. Let me ask you one last question before we jump into the 5 bold predictions, and we tease that topic, and we're going to jump into the article that's online on BehindTheSteelCurtain.com about the 5 bold predictions for 2020. Do you think if the Steelers are in a position to take a quarterback high in the, let me guess, what would that be? The 2021 draft?
Yeah, next year's draft. Yeah.
The 2021 draft. Do you think the Steelers would do that and scrap the Mason plan?
Oh, that's really tough because 2021 is one of the more loaded quarterback drafts. I like when you look at it, I could see upwards of 9 quarterbacks having the potential to be a first-round pick. It's just, as of right now, there's some guys that are absolute studs, and I think a lot of guys are going to get some really, really good quarterbacks, and I think a lot of guys are going to slip just based on somehow everyone has one now, or at least they think they do. And teams that took a quarterback in the first and second round in 2020, I don't think it's going to happen.
And Ezra Nehemiah says, Trevor Lawrence in 2021. If they're in a position to get Trevor Lawrence in 2021, one of two things have happened. They sucked or Trevor Lawrence sucked. Either way. And I think Trevor Lawrence has probably put enough good tape that he won't drop that much for the Steelers to be in a position to get him.
And number 2 at worst, but there are guys like Fields from Ohio State. He's a stud. Brock Purdy, Trey Lance from NDSU, who honestly is probably a better quarterback prospect than Carson Wentz was coming out of there. It's loaded, like all over the field. There's going to be the options to draft quarterbacks high, and I'm someone who thinks if someone is available that the team is high on, take them, let them compete, and then if Mason Rudolph isn't that guy anymore, I'm sure you could probably recoup some sort of asset if you wanted to trade him away.
Now let's switch reels and let's jump into an article that was written by, and correct me if I'm pronouncing his name wrong, Mike, Luke Rolfinke. And the name of the article on BehindTheSteelCurtain.com is 5 Bold Predictions for the Steelers in 2020. And before we jump into that, listeners, keep giving us titles for the show. We love your ideas. The ideas that I love the best are Beer and Bourbon Show, the Steelers Odd Couple, and I love Mic'd Up with Lance. I love those. I love those 3 so far. Those are my favorite of the 3. So let's jump into the 5 bold predictions for 2020 by Luke Rolfinke. And the first one, and I want to get your thoughts. I'm gonna throw them to you first, and then I'll respond, Mike, is James Conner greatly exceeds expectations and rushes for over 1,300 yards on his way to a second Pro Bowl appearance. What do you think about that prediction?
I don't think there's a snowball's hope in a microwave, I suppose. But if Ben Roethlisberger is this team's starting quarterback, he is going to not want to hand the ball off. That's if he's not getting paid to hand off the ball. That's what it comes down to. The Steelers are going to carry 4 running backs that could probably all get equal carries. James Conner is still going to be the spearhead, but I honestly don't think he's ever going to have 1,000 yards as a Pittsburgh Steeler. That's no knock on him. Even if he played a healthy 16 games, I think just the way everything's going to work out with how Ben wants to run the offense and the other guys in the system, I just don't think he's going to get the amount of carries necessary to really crack that threshold.
I don't disagree. I agree with you 100%. And I looked up. So the last time the Steelers had a back close to 1,300 yards, and I'm just going to count 2017 Lev Bell. In that year, Lev Bell had 321 carries for 1,291 yards. I believe he averaged his yards per carry was 4 on the dot. So to your point, I just don't think he's going to get the carries to be able to hit that number. I think the number to look for James Conner will be yards per carry as opposed to yards. If James Conner is around 4.3 to 4.5, I think that's where you want it. You don't want it down by 4.0 or 3.9. You want it a little bit higher, closer to 4.5. Let me give you some other numbers. So in 2018, there were 2 backs that ran for over 1,300 yards. And that's the other thing is that, and it's no knock on James Conner, is that the game is changing. You're starting to get fewer and fewer backs that run for 1,300 yards. Ironically enough, 2019 had the most probably in the last 5 years. So in 2018, Elliott and Saquon Barkley were the 2 backs that ran for over 1,300 yards, and Ezekiel Elliott had 304 carries. Again, he's not going to get the amount of carries to be able to do that unless he was ripping off runs for 5.2, 5.3 a carry. And in that case, we would love him. You know, he would have a statue on the point on the north side. He would have a statue. It'd be Connor Ball or something. If he ran for 5.5 yards, he'd be Pittsburgh's most lovable guy. In 2019, you have 4 backs that had 1,300 or more. You had McCaffrey, Henry, Elliott, and Chubb. And the most carries went to Henry with 303. Again, there's no way in the world that I think he will get 300 carries, which I think he would need to probably get that. He would probably need about 350 because he probably have to, because he's averaging around 4 yards a carry. Let me jump into the next one. Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster both break 1,000 yards and establish themselves as an elite duo.
You know what? I think there's greater potential for this one actually happening. I think Deontay Johnson, if Ben was healthy, I think he totally is a 1,000-yard receiver last year. And Ben trusts Juju, so I could totally see this happening. And especially because they're going to be the top 2 targets on the offense. And when it comes to the other 2, that core 4 receiving group, I think James Washington and Chase Claypool, of course, not having rookies basically having any reps until the season starts is going to be brutal for him. So I'm not expecting any crazy stat line out of Chase. But James Washington, I think, will also take another step. I don't think we're having 3,000-yard receivers, but I can definitely see that duo doing better, especially because of how Juju and Ben have performed together in the past. The combination of that, I think both guys will definitely probably break that 1,000-yard marker. Developing into a duo, though, could be interesting because who knows if Juju Smith-Schuster will even be on the Steelers team past 2021. So I don't know if they'll develop into a duo that's going to be a threat for years to come, just based on salary cap issues and kind of how the team philosophy is with not re-signing any receivers. It's basically they haven't done it since Hines Ward and Antonio Brown. Those are the last 2 guys that they've given those second receiver contracts to. So I think for the yards wise, I can see it this year, but I don't see this duo being a threat in the future, just based on his contract and whether or not he'll even be in Pittsburgh in 2021.
So you're saying yes?
Yes to the yards, no for them being a duo that moves into the future as one of those more dominating groups because they just won't be together.
Okay, so you're saying yes, they will both break 1,000. I think I'm going to say no. And, of course, I want to get away from the hater monicum. I just want to say no, though, because I just think, and I'm looking at a tweet from Dom Rinelli, and this is from an article on Behind the Steel Curtain that was written by Simon Chester. Actually, it was written on December 25th on Christmas 2018. And in the tweet by Dom Rinelli, it says, Antonio Brown and Juju Smith-Schuster each have 100 catches and 1,000 receiving yards in 2018. They joined the 1995 Lions, 2000 Broncos, 2005 Cards, 2009 Colts, 2014 Broncos as the only receiving duos with 100 catches and 1,000 yards. Now, what he asked in his bold predictions, he did not include catches. Now, I'm not sure how many duos had 1,000, but let's just say it's very hard to do. I think that Juju and Deontay Johnson have the ability to do it. I think the reason that they won't do it is because Ben has not played with Deontay Johnson yet. And Ben is coming back from the injury. I think had he played with Deontay Johnson last year and gained some sort of rapport with Deontay Johnson and Juju Smith-Schuster, that they could potentially do it this year. So I think one of those guys will go over 1,000, and I think it's probably going to be Deontay Johnson, in my opinion. So I think they'll have one over 1,000 and one at about 850, 900. I think they're going to get really close. But I think the other thing that's going to prevent them from doing it is the addition of Eric Ebron and those 2 tight ends. I think James Washington is in the mix because they have a nice complement of offensive weapons. I think it's going to suppress the numbers of one of those guys, and they both don't get over 1,000. And it just goes back to, man, Juju and AB were killing it. I mean, they were absolutely killing it because I think when you look at their touchdowns, I think they both had over 100 catches, like they said, and 1,000 yards. And I think when you combine the touchdowns, they had over 20 touchdowns as well. Because I know AB that year had 15, and he led the National Football League in touchdowns. Mr. Third and Fifth, excuse me. I don't want to say his full name. I'm sorry. I do have to still be negative in that regard when it comes to AB. So I will always be the AB hater guy because I'm still blocked by AB. So I think they get close, but they don't they don't do it. I think they get really close. Let me give you the next one in terms of the 5 bowl predictions. And again, you can find the article on BehindTheSteelCurtain.com. Do a search for 5 bowl predictions for the Steelers in 2020. Article written on July 18th by Luke Roll-Finke. And the next one is the offensive line is less stout and sends 0 players to the Pro Bowl for the first time since 2013.
I don't love that because I think David DeCastro is still one of the best guards in football. And Steelers fans, when it comes to Pro Bowl voting, we love our guys. Our fan base is huge. And when it comes to these fan votes and being able to retweet votes on Twitter, I think they can do it, or we do it more than other teams. So I think Steelers' influence in the Pro Bowl is higher than most teams because our fan base is so huge. If it came down to all pros, then I could see that. But I can't see a world where Dave DeCastro plays 16 solid games and Steelers fans don't vote him in the Pro Bowl. I just can't see that world just because of how much this team is loved and how big our fan base is. It really is kind of tilted in Steelers fans, big Cowboys fans, teams with big fan bases. When it comes to the Pro Bowl, it really is slanted in that direction. So I can't see it happening. The only way is if DeCastro or Pouncey or any of those guys, even Matt Filer, who took the biggest step last year, don't make it in the Pro Bowl. And I see some people throwing out Zach Banner's name. He is beloved. I could see it totally, Steelers fans just going crazy and getting this guy in. You saw it in hockey a few years ago. John Scott, who's a complete grinder. I think he had like 2 career goals in his late 30s. Everyone has a joke, vote him into the All-Star game as a captain. It's just how fans work. We're going to get our guys there. And I think I totally see a few, at least, offensive linemen for the Steelers making the Pro Bowl.
Oh, I don't want to forget that when we were talking about Steeler offensive weapons, I did not want to forget Ryan Switzer, the Mr. Electronic Football Man. I did not want to forget him, and I did not want to forget AB's name is also Gummy Richards. I didn't want to forget that as well. I agree with you. I think right now the best guards that are generally considered in the National Football League are Quentin Nelson and David DeCastro, at least on the AFC side. I think those are considered the 2 premier guards.
Marshall Yander retired too.
Yeah, and Yander retired too. That's another guy. And, there's a lot of Quentin Nelson shade I've seen on Twitter recently, accredited to Cam Hayward beating him up in that game. Cam's bull rush is just phenomenal. I mean, he's going to get everybody at least once or twice on his bull rush. His bull rush is just supernatural, the way he moves guys. I mean, it looked like they're on a blocking sled. I mean, he's literally like lifting those guys and throwing them in the quarterback's lap, and he gets guys 2 or 3 times. But yeah, I think Quentin Nelson and DeCastro are the premier guards, at least on the AFC side. And I think Pouncey is considered like the center emeritus. I don't care what type of center, I don't care what type of season he has. Pouncey is a guy, that's just respected. Pouncey, I believe, from a lot of linemen in the National Football League, they think Pouncey is like a first ballot Hall of Fame type guy, that he's been that good in his career. And, when you've been that good over time, you're just going to get the benefit of the doubt. I can look back to a block that Pouncey made in the Arizona game, pulling, where he gets a cut block on the guy on the edge near the sideline, maybe about 15 yards downfield to break a run, I believe, by Connor. It was an awesome block. I've never seen a block like that from a center. I was like, how did he do that? That was 15 yards downfield. It was just excellent. And that's why I think, he's a Hall of Fame guy. So let me jump into the next one. So we both agree there will be a Pro Bowler. Let's jump into this one. This is an interesting one. The defense sets a new team record for sacks in a season.
I think it could happen because the Steelers' offense is going to be even better, obviously, than it was a year ago, especially with a healthy Ben. It's something we keep going back to. But if they're scoring more, teams are going to have to throw the ball more. Teams didn't have to throw the ball a lot on the Steelers last year, and they still put up, 56 sacks, I think, total. just insane numbers, and they've led the NFL in like combined sacks the last 3 years. They've gone, I think they're over 160 the last 3 years combined. So I can totally see that based on how good their front seven is, how good the secondary can put clamps on the receivers, forcing quarterbacks to hold on to the ball more. I think this year for sure might be the peak of their sack total the last half decade. So I think they could totally break that team record. I can't remember what the exact number was. I think it was like 57, 58. It wasn't
56. I think 56 is the record.
Was it? Okay. So then I think a year ago they're just shy of that. But I think they could totally do this. I wouldn't be surprised at all if they did.
I'm gonna go on a limb and be positive and say they do. I'm going to say that they break it. I'm going to say that they hit to the. I'm going to say they get to 60 sacks.
Ooh.
And I think it's going to be because of what you said. To get 56 sacks playing without leads and knowing that you really don't have to pass against them to beat them, that you could, teams were in a position where they could be extremely conservative offensively and not take chances with throwing deep passes or 5 or 7 step drops against the Steelers because they just knew that the Steelers couldn't outscore them. So to be able to get sacks facing the amount of pass attempts that they face, and I don't know the number, but I'm going to argue that the Steelers probably faced in the bottom third of the National Football League in pass attempts. Like you said, what happens when that goes up and teams are chasing leads and having to chase the Steelers because the Steelers are out there? And the Oracle and the editor behind the steel curtain agrees with me. I called 60. 65 sacks would be outrageous. Mark Tobin says 65 sacks. That would be outrageous. To get 65 sacks, I think you'd have to have a guy hit 20 sacks. Somebody would have to get 21, 22 sacks. And I think we all think it would be TJ Watt. So I think they're going to get it. So you're saying just a little bit under, Mike, or are you saying they break it with me?
I say they do break it, but I don't know if it'll necessarily be 60. To touch on that one player sack thing, I think TJ Watt breaks the Steelers sacks in a season record of 16 by James Harrison in 2008. I think he breaks it, but not by a lot. I'm gonna say 16.5 for TJ. I know that wasn't the prediction, but I'm making my own.
That's good. I think TJ. I think I'm gonna be positive as well. I think TJ definitely breaks Harrison's sack record. I'm thinking TJ's around 18 and a half. Mm-hmm. And once he gets and TJ gets paid, and they back up the Brinks truck, and TJ gets paid a tremendous amount of money.
Oh
next year. I mean, just Myles Garrett money, even more than Myles Garrett money. I think the Brinks truck has the GPS coordinates to TJ Watt's house, and he'll be hearing that doo, 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 as they open the trunk and they give him that 20, 25. Well, you never know what the Steelers with signing bonuses. They do some interesting stuff with signing bonuses, but needless to say, he's about to make generational money. Let's jump into the last one. 2 players take home awards at the NFL honors. Do you think that any Steeler player will win an award for the NFL honors?
Well, I think comeback player of the year in the NFL comes down to 2 guys. One, obviously, our guy in Ben Roethlisberger. 2, the guy from the team up north, Cam Newton. I think it comes down between those 2 guys. I suppose Rob Gronkowski could also steal that award, but he took a year off. I feel like voters would probably rather lean towards someone who got hurt, not just took a year off because he didn't like Coach Belichick. So I suppose I would still say the front runners are either Cam or Ben, just kind of depending on what happens. So I could see that. I could see that for sure. Defensive player of the year and TJ Watt. I know that's what he was referencing in the article. I could see that happening, but obviously a year ago, TJ Watt did put up stat lines that no one's ever put up before, and it still wasn't even good enough for 3rd in Defensive Player of the Year voting. So it's going to be interesting. I don't think Stephon Gilmore does it again. Aaron Donald, you can't sleep on the guy. He has potential to put up 20, 25 sacks in a season. He's outrageous. So calling out to Defensive Player of the Year is really hard to pick your shot. I think we're about to hit the next 3. Within the next 3 seasons, we're going to see the best season TJ Watt will ever put up in his career. He's really in that prime right now, so it's possible. But to call that shot, I think it's too hard to say right now. But I think they do take home one. I think Ben will pick up that Comeback Player of the Year award.
See, because I'm trying to be really positive and take the hate out of the Homer and the Haters show, I'm going to go with 2 awards. I'm going to go with Defensive Player of the Year for TJ Watt. And I'm going to go for Comeback Player of the Year. Because when the Steelers make the playoffs, Ben will get it. And it'll be a fight. It'll be close. Because I think the Patriots, that team up north, will be good with Cam Newton. And I think it's a smokescreen suggesting that Cam is going to have to fight and be in a competition to be the starter. You don't bring Cam Newton in to sit on the bench behind Jarrett Stidham. I mean, you just don't do that. And he won't do that. He'll say, waive me. I mean, he won't do that. He won't waste his time up there. He'll just ask to get released. So I think Ben will win Comeback Player of the Year when the Steelers make the playoffs. And, TJ's going to win Defensive Player of the Year, because had the Steelers made the playoffs last year, I think he would have won Defensive Player of the Year. Because I think the voters would have said that the only reason why the Steelers made the playoffs is because of this defense, and it was led by TJ Watt.
Coach Tomlin would have been Coach of the Year too. If
he
that
would have been
Steelers
Coach
team,
of the Year as well.
For sure. There's no argument against that. I thought it would have been close anyway, just because of what the team was able to do. The Steelers had no business winning 8 games last year, but they did. And it realistically could have been like at least 11, even without Ben in the lineup. And I think a lot of that falls on the coach's back.
Let me jump into this comment from Andrew Wilbart. And he said 64 sacks. And this is his breakdown. Watt gets 18. Dupree gets 12. Bush 4.5. Williams gets 2. Hayward 9.5. 2 at 10. Alou and Wormley both get 1. Edmonds and Hilton get 1 each on DB blitzes. The rest of the team gets 4. That's not necessarily out of the realm. The way he breaks it down, like that feels attainable. The 18, I think, would be the toughest. But also Bud Dupree getting back-to-back double-digit sacks would be extremely tough, I think, as well, because he's Bud Dupree and it took 5 seasons for him to get to where he is now. But I think he's a different player now. That 64 is high. What do you think of those numbers? I like that breakdown, but that 64 is high. They got to be up in a lot of games, and teams got to play. Teams got to pass a lot.
That's 4 sacks a game. 4. That's insane.
Or it's like this. I know that's the average, but like I wonder, is there someone on the record? Because typically it was Cleveland, right? They'd have a Cleveland game where they'd have 8 sacks.
Yeah.
9 sacks where they could just bust out. Can they get close to 16 sacks against the Bengals?
Oh, you know what?
Bungles? Sorry, the Bungles? Can they get 16 sacks against the Bungles?
Maybe they could ruin Joe Burrow's career in one afternoon.
Little hands.
Yeah. I don't know about 16 in one game. That would be absolutely insane. In
not one game, just in the 2 games. Can they get 16 sacks in 2 games against the Bungles?
Yeah, I could see it. Their offensive line isn't great. Their weapons are okay. Burrow's young. I think he could be a little flustered after this season. I wouldn't have rushed to get Andy Dalton off this roster just to throw Burrow into the fire, which it might be soon, it might not. I guess we'll learn really quick. But I could see a series end up in that kind of favor, just especially because since he's going to be flirting with the bottom of the league again this year.
That is a nice breakdown. Pick up to you, Andrew. I think that's an outstanding breakdown. We like the numbers too, and Rhino too. Thank you for that. That's a nice, well thought out breakdown. Let me ask one last question before we get out of here, and it's in terms of the sacks. If there are no fans in stands, how much will a lack of crowd noise impact the sack totals?
I haven't thought about that yet, but it is definitely a thought to kind of wrap my head around. In like those smaller kind of Division II, like where I played, when you're on the bench, you're screaming, run, pass. Maybe that might help a quarterback to step up if they know something's coming. They might be able to scream onto the field like, step up, just like that might be a factor. It might be harder to get there. It's going to be interesting. I think the no volume in the stadiums is going to be a factor. For what side it affects, I think we'll learn really quick in week one if there's no one there. If it's better for the offense or the defense, we're going to learn very fast. But I don't know if it's going to hurt or help that sack total. I'm not sure.
That's interesting. That's a topic to think about. Maybe that's a topic for another show. I know Brian Anthony Davis, who's bad. He thought that, if there are no fans in the stands, that bad teams would just be awful. That bad teams need sort of that boost that a home crowd gives them in terms of just being unsettling on offenses, forcing offenses to use silent counts. Offenses typically on the road, commit more penalties. That not having that home field advantage of crowd noise and how it impacts an offense on the road, that great teams on the road with no crowd noise are just going to pound bad teams at home. So it's going to be interesting. I mean, like Darrin Dalton says, and we agree, no crowd noise equals better and clearer communication. So I can't imagine a really good offense going on the road with no crowd noise, being able to audible, and it'd be crystal clear. Everybody get the calls. They're going to tear up some teams. I mean, I think if you're a really good team on the road, no crowd, you're going to just absolutely brutalize some teams. I mean, you're going to be able to get your calls in. You're going to be able to audible late in the clock. And you'll be able to get through all of it because there's no silent count. I mean, you can, you're calling plays with 2 seconds on the play clock, getting into the last. Oh, they made a shift. We're going to shift again. We can get into it. So, they're going to tear some teams up. But Mike, before we get out of here, is there anything you want to tease for the week coming up in terms of articles, some information or anything on the website?
Well, we always got exciting stuff coming up. Dave Schofield put up his 53-man projection up on the roster. Of course, rookie camp is starting this week, so the contracts haven't been signed yet. I feel like you could make a pretty good prediction that it's going to happen sometime tomorrow or early on Tuesday morning. So I see keep your eye on BehindTheSteelCurtain.com for that, for all of that breaking news. It's going to happen, so just make sure you keep an eye on our website. We'll be the first ones. We'll be out there. We'll be getting the stuff ready to go. So keep your eyes tuned in for that. Always got exciting stuff coming up on the website, and of course our podcast family. It's an exciting time. Football is almost back, guys.
It is almost back. Stay patient. Hopefully, if you're a season ticket holder like Dave, or you're a season ticket holder to the Steelers as well, hopefully all that stuff gets cleared up with you. You'll know if you're going to be able to be in stands, get your refunds, all that stuff. But guaranteed, there will be football. There will be games played. If it's disrupted, who knows? No one has a crystal ball, but there definitely will be games being played for sure. And there will be Steeler football in the 2021 season. And I'm excited to see the season. I'm excited to see how the NFL handles everything in this current pandemic and how teams prepare. I think the cream will absolutely rise to the top this season. If you've got a veteran staff, if you're well organized, you've got veteran leadership. And I think the Steelers have all those things from the top down, from the organization to the coach, to the GM, to the players, to strong leaders in the clubhouse, in the locker room. I think the Steelers have everything situated if Ben Roethlisberger comes back and if Mason Rudolph again takes that jump and can be a guy that we get warm and fuzzy feelings about as a backup for Ben Roethlisberger. I think the Steelers are well situated to have a very good 2021 campaign. But with that, we're going to go ahead and conclude the show. I want to thank everybody for tuning in, and make sure that the nation takes care of the nation. Make sure you take care of your fellow man, your fellow member of Steeler Nation, so we can get to these games. And with that, we're going to conclude the program. And as always, tune in, tell a friend, and subscribe.